You're listening to The Voice of Reason. I'm Dr. Len Saputo here with Francesco Garapoli. You know, if you've wondered how we get our numbers of how many cases there are of COVID-19 and how many deaths there are, you should be wondering, because the tests are really something that haven't been worked out very accurately. And so we're stumbling around trying to find the right way that we can get these numbers so we can know how serious this problem is, because we don't know that.
You know, it's so interesting. You know, we're so used to hearing a fact and knowing that it's coming from a credible source, but we're hearing doctor after doctor, researcher after researcher say some of these tests are giving tremendous false positives or false negatives. They're not giving us accurate data.
It's so right. And the problem is unless we do know what that data is, we don't know what to do. And for a long time, we thought that the death rate from COVID-19 was something like 3 or 4 or 5%, something like that. And then the people from Stanford, people from USC and from Germany started doing tests on the population in general with a test that was better. We were using the PCR test to start with, which is totally unreliable. There may be as many as 50% of false positive tests as well as false negative. So what you're getting is almost everybody has some evidence of a coronavirus infection over the years, because these are the cold viruses that have been going around for years. And we make antibodies to them. And that's how we protect ourselves against them. So the PCR test was out. When they started doing antibody tests, the whole thing changed. And that's when they found out the actual incidence wasn't 4 or 5%. It was actually about 0.1%, which means 1 person in 1,000 was winding up dying from this disease. A whole lot different.
And people get scared when they hear this information, and then everybody holds it to be true. When we find out that, you know, first of all, this COVID isn't a new disease, a new scary monster that's come on, but it's been around with us. We've known about the coronavirus since the 1950s, actually.
Yeah. And so now we are waking up to this, everything's changing. And maybe we don't have the serious problem that we thought we had. Because if we don't have that kind of a problem, well, what are we doing? And are we going to wait until we have a vaccine and keep the whole country shut down, which is what's happening? It's a problem. So when we look at the kind of tests that we're doing, we've got to know what they mean. And unfortunately, even the antibody tests are confusing, because we haven't isolated this virus yet. And if you don't have an isolation of the virus, how are you going to make a vaccine for it? And then you have to realize that there are different kinds of antibodies that are made. If you have the neutralizing antibodies that will kill the virus or set it up so the immune system can kill it, that's one thing. But if you have what are called binding antibodies, which are just antibodies that bind to the virus but don't harm it that much, what you're going to do is think that there's going to be a lot more effectiveness from what you're dealing with this, if you had a vaccine, than you realize. You need accurate information.
Right. And when you have proof that there's antibodies in your body, you can be identified as having COVID, right? Isn't that how it works?
Yeah, but there are 7 different COVIDs.
Right.
And so which one are you measuring? That's the problem. It has to be
Exactly.
specific.
Right. And we don't have enough information to be specific yet. And I think this is sending everything into a skewed information pool that is not allowing people to make good decisions.
Yeah. Well, finally, we're starting to get to a place where, you know, there were about 200 companies trying to make antibodies, an antibody test, because the antibody test should be one that's reliable if you have isolated the virus and if you have effective antibodies. And so that's one thing. But now that one company has come out, Roche has actually developed a test that has 99.8% accuracy in determining that it is the right virus, and it has a sensitivity of 100%. So it's the only one, I think, that's going to be used now. And maybe we're going to start collecting some data that tells us what's going on.
And this will be very interesting, really interesting.
Yeah. When you look at the different kinds of things what we're actually looking for is an immunity passport. We'd like to know that we had the virus and that we're immune to the disease, and then we can go into the population and there isn't going to be any danger to us or to the people that we're exposing. And that's not exactly what, we're not in that position yet, because we haven't had enough time to be able to decide if this is really going to be effective or not. So it takes time. And unfortunately, we've had to lock down for now all these months. Our economy is going down. People are getting depressed. We're in a lockdown that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the people are starting to respond and saying, there's something wrong with this. We're not going to do that any longer. We have to do something different.
Well, especially when we find out the information from New York, like we discussed in our last segment, that it was the people in lockdown that actually were going to the hospitals with COVID-19. So obviously, we're not doing something right. And this whole issue of herd immunity is really got to be brought out into the front now, because this is how humans heal. This is how humans protect themselves.
Well, that's what they learned in Sweden. They learned that a long time before we did. And so those people, as we've been saying in many of these shows, and I'll just remind you one more time, they said, why don't we just act like adults and do what makes sense? If you're sick, stay home, for God's sakes. Don't go see your grandma who's in a convalescent hospital and start spreading a cold that's going to kill a lot of people who are immunosuppressed and have a lot of comorbid conditions. Be thoughtful about it. And that's what they're doing. And what they're finding is that the number of people that are dying is probably about the same as the number of people that are dying in this country and other places where there's a lockdown. But the difference, of course, is that at the end of this road, at the end of this year or next year, when the disease is passed, they're still going to have an economy, and we're not.
And they won't have that stress.
That's right. Yeah.
These emotional scars that get created from trauma. We know about it epigenetically. I really have to think about what's happening. My friends in Poland tell me that the police drive around with megaphones announcing, if we see you on the street without a mask, you will be fined. And these fines are upwards to a year's salary. So think about the kind of emotional stress that's being created. We see that this kind of stress can even be worse than the disease itself.
Oh, there's no question about that. Robert Kennedy has done a lot of studies on this, and there are far more, probably 10 times or 20 times as many deaths from the lockdown than there are from the disease in this setting, where only 1 person in 1,000 or 2 or 3 people in 1,000 are dying if they get an infection from COVID-19. That's what the numbers show. So now that we're getting some of the information right, and we know what the numbers are, it gives us a whole different picture. We have something to bank on, and that's what we're doing now. So you're listening to The Voice of Reason. Thanks for joining us today. Francesco and I will be back tomorrow with another show. Take care.
Thanks, Larry.